Hi, my name is Arthur and this is Broken Australia. And if you bought a new home in the last 10 years, I need you to hear this. Because there is a very good chance you got robbed in broad daylight. The person who robbed you shook your hand at settlement, and the contract you signed the day you got your keys made the whole thing completely legal. Today, I am going to show you the 4 ways your new home was designed to fail, the contract clause that strips away your right to fight back, and the one move that costs less than a mortgage payment and changes everything. Who is actually building your home? Let me ask you something. When you picture the person who built your home, what do you see? A tradie with 30 years of experience, a local bloke who takes pride in his work, someone whose reputation lives and dies in the same postcode where he swings a hammer. That image is gone. It has been gone for a long time, and the industry is very happy that most buyers still carry it around like a comfort blanket. Here is the reality. The Australian residential construction market is dominated by a handful of publicly listed volume builders. Metricon, Simons, Burbank, Coral Homes. Between them, these companies build tens of thousands of homes every year across Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales, and South Australia. They are not craftsmen. They are not even really builders in the traditional sense of the word. They are logistics companies. Their product is land and a structure placed on top of it as cheaply as the National Construction Code will tolerate. I want to be very precise about that phrase. As cheaply as the code will tolerate. Not as well as the trade allows, not to the standard a professional takes pride in. To the minimum that passes inspection and allows the builder to legally transfer the title and walk away. The term they use to make this sound acceptable is builder grade. And this is the part that I personally think is the most underrated part of the entire story, because most people hear the phrase builder grade and assume it means something, a certification, an industry benchmark, a standard that someone, somewhere, is actively monitoring and enforcing. It means none of those things. Builder grade is a marketing phrase. It has no legal definition under Australian consumer law. It has no corresponding standard under the National Construction Code. It is a way of saying we use the cheapest product that a building inspector will not flag on the day he walks through, and we are not legally obligated to tell you that. I actually have a mate, good bloke, who bought off the plan in outer Melbourne about 4 years ago. New estate, knew everything, looked incredible at the display home. He moved in on a Friday. By the following Wednesday, he had cracks running along 3 of his cornices. He had not even unpacked the kitchen yet. He called the builder. The builder sent someone out. The someone out told him it was normal settling. The cracks are still there. The builder's liability period has now expired in that state for that defect category. That is not an accident, that is the product. And here is what I want you to understand before we get into the failure points. The volume builder's incentive and your incentive are not just different, they are opposite. The builder's incentive is to pass inspection, hand over the keys, and limit their exposure to warranty claims for as short a period as legally possible. Your incentive is to live in this house, raise kids in it, and carry a mortgage on it for 30 years. Those incentives have never aligned. They are not going to align. And the system, the contracts, the inspections, the defect liability periods, every single piece of it was designed by people working for the builder, not for you. Let us get into exactly how it works.
Failure point 1, the frame behind the wall. This is the one that took me the longest to fully understand, and honestly, once I did, I had to put my notes down and just sit with it for a minute, because the frame is everything. The frame is the skeleton. If the skeleton is compromised, nothing else in the house matters. For most of the 20th century, Australian homes were framed in hardwood, spotted gum, ironbark, hardwood that had been grown slowly, dried properly, and cut to dimensions that gave it real structural integrity. Your grandparents' house was framed in it. Your parents' house probably was too. Those frames are still standing. A lot of them will be standing long after every new estate being built right now has been knocked down and rebuilt. Starting in the 1990s and accelerating hard through the 2000s, volume builders made the switch to plantation pine and engineered timber products. And I want to be fair here because pine framing is not inherently bad. It is a legitimate building material when it is specified correctly, dried to the right moisture content, handled properly on site, and protected from the elements during construction. That is a lot of conditions. And volume builders meet almost none of them consistently. Here is what actually happens on a production building site in Australia in 2025. The frames arrive. Sometimes they arrive already showing moisture uptake from storage or transport. They go up fast because the crew is being paid per house, not per hour. The roof goes on when it goes on, which means the frame can sit open and exposed through weeks of rain, particularly in Queensland and Victoria during their wet seasons. Timber that absorbs moisture during construction and then is sealed behind plasterboard without being given adequate time to dry does not just dry out once the walls go up. It holds that moisture, it moves, it shrinks unevenly. And over the next 3 to 5 years, that movement telegraphs through your plasterboard as cracking, through your door frames as sticking, and through your cornice lines as gaps. And your builder will call it normal settling every single time. But wait, I hear you asking, what about the house wrap? Surely the weather barrier on the outside of the frame stops the moisture problem during construction. Yes, about that. I spent 3 hours going through documentation published by the Australian Building Codes Board, trying to understand what the actual performance standard is for residential weather barriers, and what I found made me genuinely angry. The specification for house wrap installation in residential construction is, in practical terms, almost entirely self-regulated at the site level, which means it is only as good as the cheapest subcontractor who stapled it up on a Tuesday afternoon when the site supervisor was somewhere else. Honestly, and I say this with complete sincerity, some of what gets called weather protection on Australian production builds is essentially a slightly fancier version of a garbage bag. And I mean that almost literally. It is a thin polyethylene-based membrane, often installed with gaps around penetrations, torn at corners, and lapped incorrectly at joins. Water gets behind it. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough. And once moisture is behind the weather barrier, it is in contact with your frame, your noggings, and eventually your bottom plates. The bottom plate. The horizontal timber sitting directly above your slab. In many production builds, this is the piece of timber most consistently exposed to moisture ingress from both above and below. And it is almost never treated to the specification that the exposure risk would demand. By the time you see any evidence of this from inside your home, which might be a soft spot in the floor, a door that will not close properly, a stain on a skirting board, the damage is not a surface problem anymore. It is a structural one. This is one of those things I find myself randomly thinking about at 2 a.m, because once you understand what is sitting inside the walls of most new Australian homes, you cannot look at a new estate the same way again. All those pretty facades, all those display home kitchens with stone bench tops and brushed gold tapware, and behind the plasterboard, a frame that was wet before the roof went on. Failure point 2, the slab that was never going to last. Quick question before I get into this. If you are in a house built after 2000, drop a comment right now and tell me, have you had slab movement, cracking, a door that used to close fine and now sticks like it has been glued shut? I am betting the comments are going to fill up fast because this failure point is everywhere. Let us talk about waffle pod slabs. If you live in a home built in Australia in the last 20 years, there is an extremely good chance your house is sitting on one. The waffle pod slab replace the traditional reinforced concrete raft slab because it is significantly cheaper and faster to pour. Instead of a full volume of reinforced concrete, the waffle pod system uses a grid of polystyrene pods placed on the ground before the pour, which reduces the total concrete volume substantially. The result from above looks like a waffle pattern of concrete beams with polystyrene filling the gaps, hence the name. On paper, a properly engineered and constructed waffle pod slab is a legitimate foundation system. I am not here to tell you waffle pods are universally bad. I am here to tell you what happens to a waffle pod slab when it is designed to the minimum code specification, installed on reactive clay soil, and the site drainage is never quite right. And that last part is almost everywhere in Australia, Brisbane, Melbourne, Adelaide. A significant proportion of residential land in these cities sits on Class M or Class H reactive clay, which means the soil expands when it gets wet and contracts when it dries out. If you have ever noticed that your neighbour's garden seems to breathe, that the path in front of your house has lifted slightly over a few summers, that is reactive clay moving. A slab sitting on reactive clay needs to be engineered to manage that movement. It needs adequate edge beams, proper depth, correctly specified reinforcement, and critically site drainage that controls how moisture reaches the soil under the slab. Volume builders do not specify for the worst case. They specify for the minimum that passes the engineering sign-off, and they get away with it because the soil testing that determines the site classification is conducted at a single point in time before construction begins, under conditions that may not represent what that site will look like in 10 years after the surrounding trees have been cleared, the water table has shifted, and the drainage on the estate has changed around it. The result is slabs that move, not dramatically at first. A millimetre here, a millimetre there. Over 5 years, that adds up. Over 10 years, you have cracking that is no longer cosmetic. You have door frames racking. You have floor tiles popping their grout lines. You have plasterboard tape lifting at the ceiling joins. And if the edge beam was borderline compliant to begin with, you have the beginning of something that a builder will quote you $20,000 to $30,000 to remediate. I am going to be honest with you, this is the part of this story that I personally find the most disturbing. Because a frame issue you can potentially fix. Plumbing, we will get to that, you can upgrade. But a slab problem is under your entire house. There is nowhere for it to go. There is nothing you can do from the surface. And the builder who signed off on the slab specification has almost certainly moved on to the next estate by the time any of this becomes visible. Failure point 3, the plumbing and electrical you never see. This is a topic I avoided for a long time, genuinely. Every time I started going down this rabbit hole, I would find something that made me uncomfortable and I would close the tab. I am glad I finally faced it, because what is happening inside the walls of new Australian homes on the plumbing and electrical side is something every buyer deserves to know. Let us start with the plumbing. For most of the 20th century, Australian residential plumbing used copper. Your grandparents' house has copper in the walls, and it is still running. Starting in the 2000s, builders made the switch to PEX, which is cross-linked polyethylene. PEX is flexible plastic tubing. The same thing I said about pine framing applies here. PEX is not inherently bad. It is a legitimate material. The problem is what the production building industry did with it. Copper required soldered joints, a skilled trade, real-time, real labour cost. PEX uses crimp fittings or push-to-connect fittings that can be installed significantly faster by cheaper labour. And that is the whole reason builders love it. Not because it is better for you, because it costs them less per house. The failure point is the fitting. In areas with hard water, which covers a substantial portion of Australian urban areas, including parts of southeast Queensland and Greater Adelaide, brass crimp fittings are subject to a process called dezinsification. Zinc leaches out of the brass alloy and leaves a fitting that is structurally compromised. It looks fine, it passes inspection, and then between 8 and 15 years later, it cracks under normal operating pressure behind your drywall, and you find out about it when you see a stain on the ceiling below. Push to connect fittings like shark bites, which are extremely common on production builds because they are fast, rely on a rubber O-ring to maintain the seal. Rubber degrades. Inside a wall cavity, over 10 to 15 years, that degradation is accelerated by temperature cycling and the specific chemical composition of the water running through it. The fitting that passed inspection on the day your walls went up is not the same fitting you have in year 12. When a PEX fitting fails inside a wall, you do not hear a drip. Water saturates the wall cavity, wicks into the insulation, travels along the bottom plate, and soaks into the subfloor. By the time you see a stain or smell something wrong, the damage is well into 5 figures. Now the electrical. And this is the part where I want to be very precise about what I am saying, because this is serious. Australian electrical work must be performed by a licensed electrician. That is the law. What the law in most Australian states also allows is a licensing structure where a licensed supervisor can oversee a certain volume of work performed by unlicensed or provisionally licensed workers on a production site. On a high-volume build site, where the supervisor is managing multiple projects simultaneously, the practical oversight of individual electrical connections, circuit loading, and conduit installation is limited. I am not saying that every new home in Australia has dangerous electrical work. I am saying the structure of how electrical supervision operates on production sites creates conditions where the gap between what the supervisor signed off on and what actually happened in the wall is sometimes significant. If you want a reminder of what happens when minimum compliance becomes a culture in Australian construction, think about the La Crosse building fire in Melbourne's Docklands in 2014, or the Neo building fire in 2012. Both were driven by cladding and materials that met the minimum standard and failed catastrophically in the real world. I am not comparing your suburban home to those buildings. I am pointing out that minimum compliance and safety are not the same thing. The Australian construction industry has an established pattern of treating them as if they are. Failure point 4, the contract that signs your rights away. All right, I need you to stay with me for this one, because this is the part that makes me the most furious. I have told this part of the story enough times now that I genuinely thought the anger would fade. It has not. Every single time. I printed out over 200 pages of building contract law documentation, Australian consumer law guidance, state-based domestic building legislation, and builder warranty terms for this section. My desk genuinely looked like a crime scene investigation board. My wife walked in, looked at it, and said, "This is the most stressed I have ever seen you about something that is not our house." Here is what you need to understand about the contract you sign when you buy a new home from a volume builder in Australia. Every state has its own domestic building legislation. The defect liability periods differ. The definitions of what constitutes a structural defect versus a non-structural defect differ. And the practical effect of those differences is that the period during which you can hold a builder legally accountable for what they did inside your walls is significantly shorter than most buyers realise, and the definition of what counts is significantly narrower than common sense would suggest. In Victoria, the Domestic Building Contracts Act provides a defect warranty period of 10 years for structural defects. That sounds reasonable until you look at how structural defect is defined in practice and in case law. A crack in your slab that does not compromise the immediate structural integrity of the building as a whole is not necessarily a structural defect under the definition. A door frame that has racked because of slab movement may not be a structural defect. The movement of the slab that caused the racking may not be a structural defect if the slab itself has not failed in a way that meets the legal threshold. New South Wales has a 6-year warranty period for major defects. Queensland, Western Australia, South Australia. Each state has its own version of the same story. And in each case, the definition of what the warranty covers was written by people working in the interest of the building industry, not the homeowner. In Victoria, domestic building insurance, which builders are required to take out before construction begins, is provided by the Victorian Managed Insurance Authority. This is warranty of last resort insurance, meaning it only activates if the builder dies, disappears, or becomes insolvent. While the builder is trading, any dispute goes directly to the builder and from there to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, VCAT. The VCAT process is slow. It is expensive relative to the amounts being disputed for minor defects. It requires you to engage independent building experts to document and price the defects. It requires legal support if the builder contests the claim, which they almost always do. And the evidence shows that a significant proportion of homeowners abandon the process before resolution because the cost and stress of pursuing it exceeds the practical value of the outcome. This is not an accident. The builder's legal team knows that most people will give up, and the contract, the liability periods, the dispute resolution pathway, all of it was designed with that knowledge built in. The moment you sign a residential building contract in Australia, you are not entering a relationship of equal parties with shared interests. You are entering a structure designed by the defendant. The rules were written before you sat down at the table. The game was already over. The brands and builders that are actually worth your money, okay? So I have just spent a significant amount of time making a compelling case that modern Australian residential construction is, to use the technical term, a disaster. And I mean every word of it. But I am not going to leave you there because there are genuinely good options. They are just not the ones the industry wants to sell you. Number 3, a custom builder with fewer than 50 starts per year and a local reputation that has been established over at least 10 years in the same region. This is the builder whose name is on a sign that his kids drive past on the way to school. The builder who will give you previous clients' phone numbers without hesitation. The builder who has never poured a slab and then moved to the next project before it has been checked by someone other than the person who poured it. Do not take the builder's word for any of this. Ask for a list of clients who are 3 to 5 years past the completion of their build and contact them directly. Ask those clients whether their doors still close. Ask them whether they have had any movement in their slab. Ask them how the builder responded when something went wrong, because something always goes wrong in construction. The character of a builder is most visible in how they handle the inevitable problem, not in how beautiful the kitchen looks on handover day. Number 2, a knockdown rebuild on an established block with a fully independent building inspector engaged at every critical stage. Frame stage, pre-plaster, final, every stage. The land under an established home in an established suburb has already been through its reactive soil cycles. The trees around it have been there for decades. The drainage patterns are understood. You are not rolling the dice on what that soil is going to do over the next 30 years, the way you are on a brand new estate built on former farmland at the edge of the urban fringe. If you are building, do not let the builder's inspector be the only set of eyes on the frame before the plasterboard goes up. We will get to this in the next section. Number 1, this is the option I think is genuinely and badly underrated by the Australian buying market. A well-maintained home built before 1985. I actually visited a 1968 brick veneer home in Geelong last year. I went through it with a building inspector friend of mine, not for any professional reason. I had been going deep on this topic for months and I wanted to see for myself what the bones actually looked like on a well-maintained pre-1980 home. And honestly, I was not prepared for how different it was. The hardwood frame was extraordinary. The floor joists were full-dimension hardwood, not dressed pine, not engineered product. Full-dimension hardwood that had been sitting there for 57 years and had not moved. The copper plumbing was original and functioning perfectly. The brickwork was full brick, not brick veneer on a pine frame. It was structural. Your insurance company knows this. The underwriting data on pre-1980 homes runs for decades. The claims profile is well understood. A well-maintained brick home from the 60s or 70s often costs less to insure than a new build because the insurer data tells them exactly what they are dealing with. The closets will be small, the bathrooms will need updating, the layout will make absolutely no sense by modern standards, but the bones will be standing long after the new estate down the road has been condemned. I genuinely believe that. The one move that changes everything. Here is the single most important thing I am going to tell you today. I know I say that a lot. I have shown this specific piece of information to friends who had zero interest in construction. People who would normally scroll straight past anything about building or housing, and every one of them stopped and said, "Wait, why does nobody talk about this?" It is called a pre-plasterboard independent building inspection. Independent buyers have never heard of it. Here is how it works. Before the plasterboard goes up on your new build, there is a window, usually just a matter of days, where the entire frame is visible. Every stud, every noggin, every joist, every piece of bracing, every section of rough-in plumbing, every electrical conduit and connection point, every section of insulation, everything that will be buried behind your walls for the life of the house is completely visible and accessible. This is the only moment you will ever have to see what you are actually buying. Volume builders do not advertise this window. Many of them actively discourage buyers from engaging independent inspectors, citing site safety, insurance liability, or scheduling constraints. Be very direct about what that tells you. A builder who makes it difficult for you to have an independent set of eyes on the frame before it gets covered up is a builder who does not want independent eyes on that frame. Draw your own conclusions. A good inspector at frame stage will check the moisture content of the timber. They will check that the bracing schedule has been followed. They will check that penetrations through the frame for plumbing and electrical have been made correctly and sealed against moisture ingress. They will check that insulation has not been compressed or incorrectly placed, because incorrectly installed insulation performs nowhere near its rated specification. They will check the rough-in plumbing fittings and verify the electrical rough-in matches the plans. A good pre-plasterboard inspection costs between $400 and $800 in most Australian capital cities. The average water damage insurance claim in Australia runs into 5 figures. A slab remediation that could have been flagged early and addressed before it became catastrophic will cost you between $20,000 and $40,000 after the fact. Electrical defects that go undetected until something fails inside the wall can cost you your house. There is also a pre-slab inspection for anyone building on reactive soil. Before the reinforcement is permanently covered by the concrete pour, an independent inspector can verify the steel matches the structural drawings, the pod placement is correct, and the formwork is properly set up. That costs $300 to $500. Another window that closes the moment the concrete truck arrives and never opens again. These are the only 2 moments where you can verify what you are getting before it is buried forever. Volume builders know this. They move fast through both of them. Make independent inspections at both stages a condition of your building contract, with a minimum of 72 hours notice required. Some builders will push back, and that tells you something important. The one line I want you to remember is this: if the builder makes it difficult to have an independent inspection, that tells you everything about why they do not want one. Check the frame, check the slab, check the defect liability period before you sign. And if the builder pushes back on any of it, walk away and find someone who does not. My name is Arthur, this is Broken Australia, and everything you just heard is something every Australian buyer deserves to know before they sign.